It's Wednesday, January 22nd, 2025. A $500 billion investment in AI. Trump says goodbye to DEI and the limitations of Bernie Sanders' maybe well-intentioned worldview. Next on the AM Update.
Announcing the formation of Stargate, new American company that will invest $500 billion at least in AI infrastructure.
There are gay, lesbian, and transgender children who fear for their lives.
The U.S. has a role to play here. We've been supportive of Ukraine, but this conflict has to end.
You know, I was frankly impressed with how well he showed a lot of interest in the issues I brought up.
I introduced the bill, John, for a 32-hour work week. I was shocked. I walked the streets, I'm in the airport, people coming over to me. And you know why? People are stressed out.
OpenAI CEO Sam Altman, SoftBank CEO Masayoshi Son, and Oracle Chairman Larry Ellison appeared at the White House on Tuesday afternoon alongside President Trump and other tech CEOs to announce a massive private sector investment in artificial intelligence infrastructure in the United States.
Together, these world-leading technology giants are announcing the formation of Stargate. So put that name down in your books, because I think you're going to hear a lot about it in the future. A new American company that will invest $500 billion at least in AI infrastructure in the United States and very quickly, moving very rapidly.
Trump said it's the largest AI infrastructure project in American history. Oracle Chairman Larry Ellison said the first data project is already under construction in Texas. AI leaders have for months been sounding the alarm that more data centers, as well as the chips and electricity and water resources to run them, are needed to power their AI ambitions in the coming years. Oracle is among the biggest U.S. data center operators, and SoftBank has the kind of deep pockets needed to fund the expansion of AI infrastructure, which is expected to cost billions, of course, of dollars. Last night, President Trump's administration moved to end affirmative action in federal contracting and directed all federal diversity, equity, and inclusion staff to be put on paid leave and eventually be laid off. The move follows an executive order Trump signed back on his first day, ordering a sweeping dismantling of the federal government's diversity and inclusion programs that could touch on everything from so-called anti-bias training to funding for so-called minority farmers and homeowners. Trump has called the programs discrimination, he's right, by the way, and insisted on restoring strictly merit-based hiring. Now, once again, we're barely into day 2 of the new Trump administration. We're seeing action and words. Words first and then action. I don't know how much more you can ask for than that. Well, we're already starting to see some movement in Congress as far as implementing Donald Trump's agenda. Before Trump even took the oath of office, the U.S. House of Representatives had passed the Laken-Riley Act. Well, now the Senate has as well, as they passed the Laken-Riley Act hours after President Trump was sworn into office this week. The senators voted 64-35 to greenlight the measure, which is named after Laken-Riley, that former Georgia nursing student who was bludgeoned to death in just a brutal case at the age of 22 while out on a jog back in February of last year. 12 Democrats joined their GOP counterparts in backing the bill. Of course, 35 voted against it. Riley was strangled and beaten to death by a Tren-de-Aragua gang member, an illegal immigrant who had previously been released back into the U.S. even after multiple arrests, including for theft. The Senate bill will now get sent back to the House of Representatives, which must vote on it again because it was slightly revised in the upper chamber. The House is expected to pass the tweaked bill, which is set to be one of the first pieces of legislation that Trump signs into law as he prepares and is carrying out his major border crackdown. Now more than 20 House Republicans are backing a bill that would repeal the law used by former President Biden's administration to prosecute dozens of peaceful pro-life activists. Chip Roy of Texas is leading the effort to repeal the Freedom of Access to Clinic Entrances Act, or the FACE Act, which Republicans argue has been selectively invoked to target pro-lifers who have protested outside abortion clinics. He shared data his office obtained from the Justice Department under Attorney General Merrick Garland that showed 97% of FACE Act prosecutions in the last 20 years were against abortion opponents. Roy said in a statement, quote, "Americans just spent the last 4 years being targeted by a weaponized justice system. The FACE Act was one of the primary weapons of that abuse, being used to politically target, arrest, and jail pro-life Americans for speaking out and standing up for life." Now that we have a Republican trifecta in the House, Senate, and White House, Congress should move quickly to repeal the law and ensure that no future president can weaponize it against pro-lifers ever again. The FACE Act makes it a federal crime to use quote-unquote threats of force, obstruction, or inflict property damage intended to interfere with reproductive health care services. The 1994 law has been used by President Biden's, or now former President Biden's, Justice Department to aggressively prosecute pro-life activists since the fall of Roe v. Wade. Also tangential to this story, I told you about that executive order that outlines how you are supposed to respond and how you are supposed to refer to everyone in federal government. There are only two genders, male and female, and also did a really good job of spelling that out. I didn't notice this at first, but the White House snuck this into that executive order as well. They defined female and male. Female means person belonging at conception to the sex that produces the large reproductive cell. Male means a person belonging at conception to the sex that produces the small reproductive cell. They cleverly snuck in when life begins at conception into that executive order that mandates the usage of male and female in the federal government. Well, we have a large hole to dig out of, a deep one to dig out of. That was showcased yesterday. President Trump and Vice President Vance attended a so-called prayer service at the National Cathedral, which is run by apparently a coven of witches. This is somebody named Bishop Marianne Budd, who lectured President and Vice President Trump and Vance, respectively, that they're not being woke enough.
In the name of our God, I ask you to have mercy upon the people in our country who are scared now. There are gay, lesbian, and transgender children in Democratic, Republican,
Sounds like
and
she said
independent families.
transgender.
Some who fear for their lives. And the people who pick our crops and clean our office buildings, who labor in poultry farms and meat packing plants, who wash the dishes after we eat in restaurants and work the night shifts in hospitals, they may not be citizens or have the proper documentation, but the vast majority of immigrants are not criminals.
What are you going to do with our chattel slavery, our chattel labor? Don't take our slaves away. That's not a bishop. That's a witch. She's evil. I'm sure her name, Marianne Dunn, that's really Lucifer speaking through her right there. It's just the doctrines of demons. Again, this just illustrates the fact that they're willing, the left is willing to do that right to the face of the new president and vice president. Just completely browbeat them, hector them right to their faces with just this woke, demonic nonsense garbage. That shows you how deep the rot goes. But so far, we're looking so good. It seems like Donald Trump and his new administration are up to the task. I mentioned in passing the other day that Marco Rubio passed his Senate confirmation vote with flying colors 99-0. He took the oath of office yesterday and quickly appeared on media discussing his priorities in the coming administration.
One of the most important lines in yesterday's inaugural address was when President Trump said he wants to promote peace. And I think everyone should be happy that we have a president that wants to promote peace. And that means we want the war in Ukraine to end. Now, obviously, neither it's going to involve complex and hard diplomacy. It has to be vigorous. Every side's going to have to give because neither Russia nor Ukraine can achieve the maximalist goals that they may have for this conflict. But he wants the dying to stop. So it will not be simple. It will not be easy, but it is important. It has to happen. That's a priority. And we'll be working on that. And it won't be negotiated in press conferences or interviews. It'll have to be negotiated the way all of these kinds of deals are negotiated, and that is in settings in which we use our leverage, our influence, our national power to bring about not just an end to a conflict, but also to provide long-term stability for Europe and beyond. I don't think anyone wants to see a conflict end only to see it restarted 2 or 3 years down the road.
That is Secretary of State Marco Rubio laying out what his agenda is for the Trump administration as it comes to foreign policy. He says ending the war in Ukraine is one of the biggest priorities. Coming up, a southern snowstorm, and a legit one at that. Well, we've got a tale of two people, one losing their job, another losing their chains, and the limitations of Bernie Sanders' worldview. That's coming up next. I know this has been a burning question on all of your minds. Hey, if you ever wondered what it sounded like when a bayou boat skirted around on the snow in Louisiana, that's your answer. You just heard it. A historic snowfall is burying parts of the Gulf Coast amid dangerous cold as a once-in-a-generation winter storm wreaks havoc on travel in the region wholly unaccustomed to winter weather. Snow fell from southeast Texas through Louisiana and to parts of Mississippi, Alabama, and Florida on Tuesday, creating treacherous conditions. An area stretching from Houston into southern Louisiana has already recorded widespread 3 to 6 inches of snow, with one locale hitting the double-digit mark, and more is on the way. Heavy snow and strong wind gusts combined to create whiteout conditions in southern Louisiana, where snow totals of 3 to 6 inches are already widespread. It prompted the first ever blizzard warning anywhere along the Gulf Coast from the National Weather Service in Lake Charles for parts of southern Louisiana and far eastern Texas. It was certainly a sight. Saw the welcome to Florida sign near Pensacola, just roads completely covered with snow along the American, oh yes, it is the American Gulf Coast now, or the Gulf of America coast, if you want to say that. Yeah, I just want to remind you, and I've gotten a lot of feedback over the last couple of weeks, people really enjoying the new format and maybe extended edition of the AM update. I appreciate that you like that. And if you really do like it, even if you've done it before, make sure to give me a 5-star review on the podcast platform of your choice, probably iTunes or Spotify. It looks like most listen there. And if you could, my goal this year is to grow this here little pokey show as much as I possibly can. And that's going to take you telling your friends, telling people who you'd think would be interested in a podcast like this, a morning news update from a source that's not trying to sound like NPR, wink, wink, unvarnished, unfiltered, and hopefully unsanitized. Make sure you tell your friends about the AM update. I post the link to the episodes both on Instagram and on X every single morning. If you could just repost those, send those around to your following, that would be greatly appreciated. The only way that this is going to grow is if you help me do so. I really, really do appreciate each and every one of you for helping me. Reminder, I am on Instagram, both Instagram and X handles at Real AM Update. And I do post things on Instagram that I don't post on X. You should check out this post that I did on Instagram back on Inauguration Day, which happened to be MLK Day as well. It's about a 15-second long reel, really funny. You want to check that out at Real AM Update on Instagram. And now a tale of two individuals. One is losing his or her job. Another is losing his chains. We'll start with this. A high-ranking federal official obsessed with diversity, equity, and inclusion is now out of a job now that President Donald Trump is back in office. On Monday, Trump, of course, took the oath of office for a second time and implemented one of his campaign promises, which was to eradicate DEI and other leftist ideologies that have overtaken federal agencies. One of his first attempts at reducing the DEI footprint was apparently to remove Admiral Linda Fagan as the commandant of the Coast Guard. Fox News spoke with a senior official from the Department of Homeland Security when they first reported Fagan's ouster 1 minute after midnight on Tuesday, indicating she was fired within hours of Trump's inauguration. So, Trump is already slitting throats, figuratively, getting rid of the wokesters in our nation's federal bureaucracy, including the Coast Guard. And now there's this story. I told you about the pardoning or commutations of sentences for the January 6ers. Well, there's one story you may have heard about before. Enrique Tarrio, who is a Proud Boys leader, he was sentenced to 22 years in prison for January 6th, even though he wasn't in Washington, D.C. at the time of the riot. Now, I'm not a huge fan of Proud Boys, mainly because I don't really know too much about them. So it's hard for me to be a fan or be against anything I don't know too much about. But 22 years in prison over an event where he didn't even attend? A D.C. jury convicted him of seditious conspiracy and other crimes in 2023 for the disruption of the counting of the electoral votes in the Capitol. He was given the longest sentence out of all the January 6th defendants. So, again, I wanted Trump to pardon all of them, regardless of violence or not. The pardon has been cheapened beyond recognition. But, again, you don't have to necessarily like guys like this, Enrique Tarrio. But 22 years in prison for seditious conspiracy, and you're putting him in prison for that long? Again, justice was served here. He did not deserve that. I'm glad Donald Trump gave him a pardon. So So one thing that the new Donald Trump administration is going to have to be careful about is making sure they're not infiltrated by left-wingers, globalists, who intend to do them no good. Now, there have been several ovations, both overt and kind of under the radar, of people who would typically not be associated with anything having to do with right-wing politics, making their way to Mar-a-Lago to attend various meetings and cocktail hours and golf outings with Donald Trump. To me, that came off as just kissing the ring. Well, the Wall Street Journal sat down with Microsoft founder Bill Gates, a globalist through and through. He was one of the chief panic porn artists for COVID back in 2020. Sat down with him, and he says he had a really good meeting with Donald Trump.
You met with Donald Trump since the election?
Yeah, I had a chance to go have a long and actually quite intriguing dinner with him.
What did you discuss? What was intriguing?
Well, we touched on a lot of things. It was over 3 hours. To my surprise, it was, just he and I, his chief of staff, Susie Wiles, and the person who helps manage things for me, Larry Cohen. So the four of us sat there, and it was quite wide-ranging. Global health's the area that I work in, and such amazing things have happened and can happen there. I spoke a lot about HIV and that the foundation's literally working on a cure for that. We're at an early stage, and so he, in the COVID days, accelerated the vaccine innovation. So I, was asking him if maybe the same kind of thing could be done here, and we both got, I think, pretty excited about that. We talked about polio, where we're very close to getting that done, but if you stop, it'll spread back, and so I explained why it's been tough in Pakistan, Afghanistan. We've had cases show up in Gaza. We have cases in Africa. And he was fascinated to hear what he could do to maximize the chance that during the next 4 years, that incredible milestone will be achieved. I felt like he was, energized and, looking forward to helping to drive innovation. I was frankly impressed with how well he showed a lot of interest in the issues I brought up.
So again, this could just be a case of somebody who has been a sworn enemy of Donald Trump acknowledging that he won and it's time to kiss the ring and try to work together. That could be what this is, but Bill Gates is a snake. And Donald Trump and his new administration, I'm sure they know this already, but they're going to have to be really careful not to allow snakes like Bill Gates to infiltrate their new administration. So far, I'm not too worried about this because the inauguration day with all of the executive orders that Donald Trump signed is pretty much antithetical to everything that Bill Gates and his foundation has worked towards over the past 20 years or so. So I'm still not worried about it. What I really think is happening here is a lot of these guys that you don't trust, and rightfully so, and I don't trust, and rightfully so, are bending the knee to some degree. Now, is it enough? That remains to be seen. And Donald Trump is the guy with the power to make sure that it is enough. Now, Larry Ellison, I talked about him earlier with this massive $500 billion AI infrastructure project. He made some really weird comments yesterday. We'll talk about those tomorrow about AI and mRNA jabs. Again, we'll talk about those tomorrow. But that is going to be the challenge for the Trump administration. So far, it seems like they've got this thing buttoned down with America First serious policy. So I'm not worried yet. Coming up on Air Analysis, the limitations of Bernie Sanders' maybe well-intentioned worldview. And now here's this. Senator Bernie Sanders sat down with Jon Stewart for the weekly show and says he wants to move America to a 32-hour work week.
Sean Fain is the head of the UAW. Mm-hmm. And in my view, he's doing a great job. And not only did he win a very good contract for his workers, he raised issues which are now resonating all over the country. And one of the issues he raised is, he said, you guys are making huge profits. You've made huge profits over the years. And meanwhile, many of my workers, he had young people coming into the automobile factories making $17, $18 an hour. CEOs making $25, $30 million a year. All right. And then he raised this question. He said, you know what? We want a 32-hour work week. That was part of his contract negotiations. And everyone said, Sean, you're crazy. What are you talking about? A 32-hour work week. And his point was, we are producing more product right now. And all of those gains are going to the people on top.
That's right.
I introduced the bill, John, for a 32-hour work week. I was shocked. I walk the streets. I'm in the airport. People coming over to me. And you know why? People are stressed out. They're seeing work in a very negative way. COVID maybe, exemplified that, what happened during COVID. So what we have got to be asking ourselves, and you're touching on it now, all right, you got all this new technology, artificial intelligence, robotics, making us more productive. Who's going to benefit from that? What are the repercussions of that? Are workers now going to have higher wages, shorter working hours, or the rich going to get richer?
And finally, air analysis, slightly acidic, mostly necessary. What you just heard illustrates the insufficiency of Bernie Sanders' very secular worldview. I've said before, I have a newfound appreciation for some of the issues that Bernie Sanders has championed over the years. He's railed against what he calls fascism. And I think he was actually proven true back in 2020 as big government and big business colluded to squash any narrative opposed to the prevailing government narrative about COVID. We weren't allowed to ask questions. We weren't allowed to ask why we had to wear masks. We just had to wear masks. We just had to social distance. And the big corporations helped enforce government edicts, even though there was, of course, no science behind it. That is fascism in and of itself, and Bernie Sanders has been right about that over the years, more than I gave him credit for to begin with. Of course, his solution, well, he always says the problem is that government created this problem, and his solution is, well, we need more government. That doesn't make any sense. But the idea to decrease the weekly workload from a traditional 40-hour work week, which is not really traditional, by the way, it's really an invention over the last 100-plus years or so, but reducing that from 40 hours to 32 hours, I believe he actually is doing that from a motivation to make people less stressed, to help them. Here's the problem. The number of hours worked in a week is not why people are stressed primarily. People need Jesus. They're stressed in their life because they're in turmoil spiritually, and people like Bernie Sanders are absolutely ill-equipped to understand this. So even though they may be well-intentioned, they may really want people to have less stress in their life. They think the solution is something that they can control with a pen and a phone or a piece of paper or a bill. And that's just not true. And if you have a very secular worldview, you're an old Soviet like Bernie Sanders, you're never going to understand that. You're never going to understand the root cause is always spiritual. Anyway, that'll do it for a Wednesday. We'll be back at it again tomorrow. I'm Aaron McIntyre, and this is the AM Update.